To think that it's only brothers named Carl Malone in Utah. All right? We have brilliance all over the planet, including Utah. So family and friends, community members, loved ones, do me a favor and give a strong round of applause to RJN's board member, our brother and your brother, Dr. William Smith. My man.
How's everybody doing? How's everybody doing? You gotta do better than that. Come on. And you see, I'm coming all the way from Utah, and let me go to the next slide right quick, brother. Let me do some house cleaning, because I didn't like the way y'all looked at me. He said Utah, and y'all kind of look funny. Y'all looked at me like I can't play spades or something. like I reneged or something like that. That's where I work. Next slide. That's not where I'm from. Honorable Minister Elijah Muhammad said a cat can have her kittens in the oven. That don't make them muffins. So I might live in Utah, but I ain't from Utah, from Chicago. So let's get that straight right quick. And for the sisters in the room, I do have a black queen. That got to clear the air, because, that was the next thing. They looked at that ring, they say, okay, well, you might be from Chicago, but you live in Salt Lake City, and we don't know what's your resume like. So my queen brings greetings from Salt Lake City. And she knew I was coming here. She knew I was just going to rejoice in this blackness. So I always got to just take a second, because, you feel a certain kind of way when you're around your people. And it's an impactful feeling, especially when you don't have the numbers that you're used to and you're accustomed to, in a culture that sustains you. So growing up in Chicago, I took it for granted. But going out in Salt Lake City, I really appreciate what I left. But I never really left, because it's always in me. So one of the things I want to talk about is this understanding of racial battle fatigue, to have you get a better understanding of the kind of a primer of what happens to black people in particular, specifically, but really black boys, as we're addressing in this emergency convening. Next slide, please. Why do I study the biopsychosocial effects of racism? Now, I guess, they had to have the resident baby boomer as part of this event. We've had the younger scholars already who gave a dynamic presentation to help us understand what we're dealing with. But I want you just to walk with me a little bit. Growing up in Chicago, one of the most racially segregated cities in the United States still, right? Where if you were a black boy and you rode your bicycle across an imaginary line, you could be stoned to death. In the neighborhood where our first mayor, Mayor Daley, not the second one, used to live. And I just want you to think about what it meant to be a black person, not only growing up in the 50s and 60s, but even to today. What does it mean when you normalize violence against your body, where it doesn't really move you in the way that you're under a physical attack every day of your life? What does that do not only to your psychology, but what does it do to your biology? What does that put you in a state of, right? Brother Dr. August talked about trauma. I saw trauma on his slide, but I want to clarify something. Trauma is not what happens to you, right? Trauma is the event that occurred. Trauma is in your body. It changes your body, right? So I got a little video. I want you to play the next slide, and let's see, you might remember these brothers. Go on and push it.
You know the chains I wore in Roots? I keep them over the hearth in my living room, right above my 12 Emmys. What is that about?
I don't know. What is it to you?
America first met me as Kunta Kinte, a young African kid who was kidnapped, tortured, refused his slave name. Then I read to their children and maintained the integrity of their favorite spaceship. Pretty soon, people began to think of me as safe.
Oh, the safest.
Once, I read Go the Fuck to Sleep for charity.
Yeah.
One of my brand partners dropped me.
What, you can't even say fuck?
I can, but there are consequences. I said fuck. I lost money.
Shit.
If I showed how angry I really am, but I'm not gonna hide it. So, I keep my chains on the wall in the living room. I want my guests to know, while I am unquestionably their friend, I am also absolutely filled with rage.
Next slide, brother. And that's what I want to talk about. I want to emphasize the fact of what is a lifetime of feeling enraged. What does that do to you? The other way. James Baldwin, no problem. James Baldwin tells us to be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all the time. Now, some people might think of this like in inadequate ways, like what happened during COVID-19, 2020, pre-existing conditions, right? And black people dying at alarming rates, higher, disproportionately higher than any other group. Let me just set the record straight. Black people wasn't dying because of these pre-existing conditions. What they were dying from is suffering with fighting against white supremacy on a day-to-day basis. The pre-existing conditions that occurred was because of that fight that put us at risk for death, right? So it's the rage that we have to understand that is a normal experience, a normal feeling of things being out of order when you're feeling violence toward the body. Next slide, please. The other way. Keep on. So if you can name your pain, you can start to develop effective strategies for moving from just survival, resilience, and resistance. People usually stop there. We have to learn how to thrive. And we have to be in a place where we have African consciousness and centeredness. And that's where we tend to be limited in these schools. So diminishing one's pain paves a way for healing's embrace, creating space within for the restoration of the spirit. Next slide. Who's this? I said it's going to be a primer. This is almost a history lesson. Anybody have an idea? Who? $100, the first person to say it right. All right. Next slide. Who's that? Oh, okay. Next slide. That's David Allen Greer, all right? Great. Keep going. No. You go way too fast. Come on, you giving my test away now. Go back. Go back. That's his father. Dr. William Greer, a psychiatrist. He co-authored the book, Black Rage. So what I study isn't something that I invented. It's not the concept of racial battle fatigue, even though I coined this over 20 years ago. It had already been in development from Carter G. Woodson and other scholars all the way through the 40s, the 50s, the 60s with this book. And so this is a brother who had studied at Howard, went on to Michigan, became a psychiatrist, married a teacher, had David Allen Greer, and he talked about the everyday struggle that Black people have to go through in their lives, that it's almost like a menticide, right? It's all right to understand this is part of the normal process of being in an alien world that is violent against you, not just your mind, but also your body. So you might be in a constant state of rage. Next slide. So this is the book, Greer and Cobbs. Next slide. So push, that's a lot of words, so push next, it should highlight the words. So racial battle fatigue is a systemic, racism-related, repetitive stress injury. So what is this? This is a psychological, emotional, physiological overload. This is stressing the body, a race-related stress appraisal that is taxing our system. And so those available coping resources that we might have in place to fight off against white supremacy and racism is being exhausted. So you might not be able to lean on your familial or your personal or your economic strengths, right? Because they're being overwhelmed. And so this is what produces racial battle fatigue. So this is a disturbed person, environmental, racist relationship. So I want you to really capture that. This is an everyday experience, not just a one time where you've been accosted by somebody or called the N-word or disrespected, but from the womb to the tomb. Am I doing that? That's static? Let's go to the next slide. Push next. Let's look at some of the cognitive things. Now, I should be walking down somebody's street right now, all right? Some of the psychological distresses, anxiety, most common, threat vigilance or hypervigilance. We've heard about stereotype threat, where you have there's a domain that you put in a lot of time and energy in, and you feel that you're very competent in, but they can use these stereotypes to make you underperform. John Henryism, or the strong Black woman, right? That kind of high effort coping. The imposter syndrome, where you know that you're capable and competent, but the environment makes you question yourself. Some people call it race life, right? So some of these are the kind of cognitive, psychological distresses, and depression is right there with it, right? That oftentimes, now you could have one or many of these symptoms, but those are the things that you battle with, you fight with, that your resources are trying to fend off from having racial battle fatigue. Next slide. Then you have your emotional behavioral dysregulation. You might have apathy. How often do you just get angry? Let me put it this way. There was a song by Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, featuring Melly Mel. Don't push me, because I'm close to the edge. Right, you remember that? That's racial battle fatigue. You push me a little, I wish I would, right? That's how you feeling every day when you're in these foreign environments that are hostile towards your being, your Blackness, your Africanity. They don't want you there. And it's a stress overload, but White society is also stressed by your presence, right? So in order to reduce their stress, they have to control your black body. And this is what Dr. Curry has said brilliantly, Dr. August has said brilliantly about what the black body, male body represents. Quickness to argue, well, you're getting ahead of me. Withdrawal, isolation, poor school or job performance, changes in relationship. I'm working with some black dentists right now in a study, 5 dentists, and we're looking at dental disease, right? Black people grinding their teeth. I bet if I polled this room, half of you got cracked molars. That's what we're finding. Because at night, what happens is you're clenching your jaw so tight that you start to crack your molars, right? Or you grind your teeth down. We're doing that disproportionately at higher rates than any other group because you can't relax. What happens when you're supposed to go to sleep at night? You're supposed to rest and have restoration, right? To be able to recuperate. Your body is supposed to cleanse itself out. Most black people are getting 3 less hours of sleep than their white counterparts. So it's almost like, think about the mind as the brain as a computer, and it's being defragmented. It can't defragment. So now you have clutter. Now you're not as sharp when you don't sleep, when you don't get the appropriate amount of sleep. So you are much more prone to sickness and disease, right? The next one is headaches. So these are some of the physiological symptoms: heart problems, gastric distress, sleep disturbance, insomnia. And we're finding that to be the case too among many blacks, insomnia. Other symptoms: perspiration, rash, hives. And you're wondering, well, why do I have this? And your doctors are mistreating it, misdiagnosing it, right? They don't know where it's coming from. But this is being highly stressed for a prolonged period of time, that these are the manifestations of what you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Are y'all following me? You with me? All right. Let's go to the next slide. Now here's Dr. David Williams, and he says it's like this. He was on 60 Minutes Overtime. Imagine a fully loaded jumbo jet with 220 passengers and crew taking off and crashing today, and the same thing happened every day, next week, and every day the next month, and every day for the rest of the year. That's exactly what is occurring when we say that there are racial disparities in health in the United States. Over 200 black people dying prematurely every single day. He said this in 2001. Unfortunately, that number has increased. So we're almost up to 400 people, right? That's the toll that racism takes on the body, and disproportionately we're finding young black men and black men in general having that, being counted in those numbers. Next slide. This is my mentor. Like myself, Dr. Pierce had an appointment in the School of Medicine at Harvard and also in the School of Education. He's the one who coined the term racial microaggressions, okay, which I've extended his work into racial battle fatigue. He talked about STEM. That's just way before space or science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, all right? He talked about space, time, energy, and mobility. When your STEM is oppressed, your stress goes up. The more control you have over your STEM, your space, your time, your energy, and your mobility, your stress goes down. So what does that mean? Let's think about it at practical times. When you have to spend time dealing with racism every day, that exhausts your ability to control your space. Now I have to deal with additional time to deal with that, my emotions and my mobility. One day I was driving my daughter with me to work on the weekend. And she was only about 6 years old at that time, so she was in her car seat in the back seat. So I'm driving, I come to a T in the road, I stop. I look, see cars coming. I see a police parked over to the side, and he's clocking the people coming on the T, on the cross. I make a right-hand turn. He comes behind me and pulls me over. And I say, officer, what's going on? He said, as far as I can tell, you didn't stop at the stop sign. And my daughter in the back seat, yes, he did stop. He hollered at the police, right? And I'm like, be quiet, baby, because I didn't want to get shot. And now think about that. Anytime when you're black and those lights come on, your heart rate just goes up, right? Even if it's on the highway, you're looking at the police, I hope they don't pull me over. And you're trying to think of everything you've done that day. Did I do anything wrong? I know I ain't got nothing in here illegally. What you're thinking is after you. Now you're dealing with me. He stopped me, he's gonna give me a ticket. He's entered my space. Now I have to deal time with this police officer. My emotion, my mobility. I gotta go fight this ticket, right? And how much time do we exert every day of our lives, every week of our lives? Like Dr. Williams said, every month, every year, dealing with racism. What is the toll that plays on our psychology and our biology? Next slide. This is push it next. One of the early pieces that I read by Dr. Pierce was the psychiatric problem of the black minority. And in this, it was a quote that I'll never forget. Push next, please. He says, the major and overriding psychiatric problem of the black minority is the withering or weathering effect of racism. Hence, the social, cultural, and community aim must be to dilute, undercut, and eliminate racism wherever and however it is located. So he told us what happened. Then he said what we have to do: dilute, undercut, and eliminate racism. Next slide. And this is one of the other pieces that he wrote, offensive mechanism, which gave much more of the foundations for racial microaggression. Next slide. One of the things that we must understand is that anti-black racism is an act of violence. The body codes racism as a violent act. So this is just like you were experiencing Hank Aaron with a baseball bat just taking a blow to your body every time somebody says or does something to you in a racist way. Now, your mind might play tricks on you, but your body is a human lie detector. Your body will tell you what's wrong, even if you want to believe that it wasn't racist. You'll start having ulcers. You'll start having headaches. You'll start having back pains. Matter of fact, I would dare to wager that, especially given the age of this group, a good number you have lower back pain. A good number you have leg pain. I've been switching my legs since I started talking, since my legs hurt. So I'm looking at, okay, I'm gonna be sitting in a second, so I'm gonna get real comfortable. But when you go to your doctor, what does your doctor say? So you tell them about the problem. And then the next thing they're gonna do is to tell you to go into PT. They're never gonna ask you about your stress load, your stress level. What has happened when you in your childhood? Is there something going on in the atmosphere in which you work in? How is racism making a factor in your life? Those are not the questions that are going to be asked because, like Dr. August has said earlier, some of these therapists, aren't, even if they look like us, aren't trained to understand the black dynamics. I unquestionably am dealing with colleagues who are Black, African American, and African, and Caribbean, who know nothing about the Association of Black Psychologists, who know nothing about the Black Psychiatric Association of America, who have never read Bobby Wright, who've never read Naeem Akbar, who never read Chester Pierce, right? Who have never understood African cosmology. So how would they be able to understand the problems of Black people in general and Black boys and men specifically? Next slide. Dr. Pierce argued since the 60s that racism is a public health crisis. I've been arguing it for the last 30 years. And finally, the CDC, and if you see some of these QR codes are actually connected to research or evidence, because I don't want you to think that I'm making all these statements and it's not backed up by science. But the CDC has finally said that racism is a public health crisis. Next slide. But why has anti-Black racism lasted so long? Next slide. So we're going to take a little walk. Next slide. Next slide. Through history. Now we know that the founding of Jamestown was 1607. Next slide. So this is 61.87% of U.S. history that there was foundational oppression of Black people. Next. Enslavement was about 59% of that, starting in 1619. Next slide. Black codes in 1865 was about 2.8% or 3% of our history in this country. Next slide. 1877 was the Jim Crow period. So that's about 23% of our history. I'm trying to show you a pattern of what we've had to endure. The legacy of racism, the legacy of oppression. What does that mean on the psychology and in the biology, right? What happens to a people who have to go through their whole lineage in a system that does not like you, that treats you like you're a pathogen? Next slide. All the way to 1972. That's just Jim Crow, right? If I were to ask you about Brown versus the Board of Education, we know when did that go to the Supreme Court? All right, what was that last year? All right, when did they become compliant? Go to the 80s. That's white supremacy. I don't care what the U.S. Supreme Court says, white supremacy rules, right? Next slide. So my argument is that systemic racial oppression for Black people has been 100% of the time that we've been here. That's how we have to put our understanding in context of what we're dealing with. Next slide. I know some of these are your fans, so you're fans of some of these people like old TJ up here. But this is what they think about us. I mean, they told us that these were the smart, intelligent people we supposed to, huh? You saw the $1 bill. Here's what TJ said. Blacks smell bad and were physically unattractive, required less sleep, were dumb, cowardly, and incapable of feeling grief. Advance it, therefore, as a suspicion only. Blacks, whether originally a distinct race or made distinct by time and circumstances, are inferior to whites in the endowments of body and mind. And you'll see that there's a thread that goes through these people's thinking. And they're always going to go back to body and mind. Go to the next slide. I think you talked about drapetomania. So I won't spend some of the time that Dr. August has already dealt with, but he did a great job. But drapetomania was just one of several types of disorders, diseases that black people had. Now, the crazy thing about drapetomania was that this was a disease of black people who were running away from enslavement. I think most of us should be looking to be drapetomaniacs. We should be trying to run from our enslavement, fight against our enslavement. But the treatment for this was to stretch them wide, get a cat of nine tails, whip them, 100 lashes, and then set them out there as a sign of what you will get if you try to ever run away from enslavement. Next slide. Now, I said I'm from Chicago, and just like most black people my age or older, you grew up especially from Illinois, you grew up, and some of you Negroes too, grew up idolizing Lincoln. Matter of fact, in most black households, when I was young, you had a picture of Lincoln, Kennedy, King, and Malcolm on your wall, especially on your grandparents' wall, right? With the plastic sofas in the living room. Yes, sometimes. Let's look what Lincoln said. Now, he's supposed to be the great emancipator. He said, now, I got the QR code. I'm not lying. I ain't making this up. I will say then that I am not, nor ever have been, in favor of making voters of the Negroes or jurors or qualifying them to hold office, of having them to marry with white people. I will say in addition that there is a physical difference between the white and black races, which I suppose will ever forbid the two races living together upon terms of social and political equality, and inasmuch as they cannot so live, that while they do remain together, there must be a position of superior and inferior, that I, as much as any other man, white man, am in favor of the superior position being assigned to the white man. Ladies and gentlemen, I think you have somebody who's outed themselves as a white supremacist. It's clearly what he said. But we still are being misled by our educational process to think that this is the great emancipator. He was against, I'll give him his credit, he was against enslavement, but he was still for the superior position of white over black and wanted them to be repatriated, even though it's been over 100 years. So you're basically here, you're born here, I see your head. And we know it's political reasons. Matter of fact, the South wrote the, the Re-Emancipation Proclamation, where they said we're going to re-enslave because you have no authority over the South, right? Next slide. So we're going to keep going. I think Dr. August might have had something in his presentation about this, but I just want to give you, like I said, a primer on the history that leads up to racial battle fatigue and what we're dealing with that connects to Curry and August's presentation. But this is Dr. Charles Carroll, one of the top thinkers of the time. But he wrote this book called The Negro Beast, or In the Image of God. Chapter 2 starts off like this. The white, the highest, and the Negro, the lowest of the so-called 5 races of men, present the strongest contrast to each other in their, again, physical and mental characteristics. So you see this pattern of thought that's the embodiment of white supremacy. Keep going. Now, we've all heard about the birth of a nation. And we know that many of us may have forgotten that President Woodrow Wilson had a PhD and was a historian. He allowed the film The Birth of the Nation to be shown at the White House. And this led to one of the biggest growth of the Ku Klux Klan and the women of the Ku Klux Klan after the showing of this film. And he said it was like writing history with lightning. And my only regret is that it's all so terribly true. The white men were roused by a mere instinct of self-preservation until at last there had sprung into existence a great Ku Klux Klan, a veritable empire of the South, to protect the Southern country. Now you understand, this is the essence, this is the foundation that the country is built on. It's not about emancipating black people. It's about having slavery only led to a permanent underclass system, right? How many of you are familiar with this book? Or this, all right, well, we got a few. This was written in 1951, led by Paul Robeson and a lot of other scholars. And W.B. Du Bois tried to go to Paris to present this argument, and they called him a foreign enemy of the state and didn't allow him into Paris. But this was documented evidence, much like Dr. Curry tries to do in his current research, but also is documented in his previous research from Man Night to the White Man's Burden and other books that he's written. But it's just copious, systemic evidence of the lynchings and the brutality of the white system against black people, right? And they were making an argument to the United Nations that we charge genocide based upon your own documentation of what genocide is. So we have to start to ask the question about, is this still a genocidal process, right? So not only menticide, but genocide. And that's what I use as my lens for almost every policy and practice that goes on for or against black people. Next slide. So my definition of anti-black racism is an injurious and specific stressor that poses violent threats to the biological, psychological, physical, cultural, and social health and the associated interlocking identities of the black person, whether it be anti-black misogyny, misandry, queerness, homophobia, disability, and classism. And you saw some other groups going through there because this is a systemic level of oppression, but at the bottom of that caste-like system is black people. Next slide. Next slide. So black boys do not feel safe. I think that argument has clearly been made. And most educators get it wrong when they're taught in schools. Do we have any teachers here? Just a couple. In colleges of education, you're taught to teach to the brain. And that's wrong. We have to teach to the body. When the body feels safe, the mind will open up to possibilities of learning, expansion. But if I'm feeling like there's a flight or fight threat present, and I'm not comfortable, I'm not safe, I don't feel loved, then I won't learn. So what we see in these schools where black boys are underperforming is that they don't feel a sense of safety, and they definitely don't feel a sense of love. And they always are in a position where they feel threatened, they feel attacked. So I can go from one class where I am performing, maybe above my ability, into the next class where I'm underperforming, and it's all because of relationships, right? I feel unsafe. And what about the whole process of getting to school, moving from class to class, and going around that whole school? If the school environment is not a safe one for black boys, there's something called the insular cingulate that it controls disgust. So there's key words that we can use. Some of them have been used in the presentations today. So if it's a word that he's bad or threatening or this or that, that triggers a response to people. And that means automatically I'm going to shut down my emotions towards you that are pleasant and see you as something like a villain, right? And that's how black boys are responding about their positions in school, how they're being treated. Next slide. This sister, Donna Ford, at Ohio State University, looked at this. One of the recent studies that came out about what's going on in schools and black boys. Next slide. And some of the things that they saw was that were real obvious. Disproportionate discipline, adultification, racial disparities, and they said that anti-bias training, cultural competence training, and screening for racial biases among teacher applicants are only a minimum of what is needed to address these issues. But these boys are being over-disciplined, and they're seen as older than what they are. We all remember Tamir Rice, right? What was he, 7 years old? 13, 12? But they made him they said that he was older, that he was a threat. But they shot him within 2 seconds of arrival in a right to carry state. So if he was old enough to carry, in a right to carry state, why are you taking him out in less than 2 seconds? It's like Curry said, they don't see him as human. They see him as a nigger beast. Next slide. This is some of the work of Raj Chetty. Push play. So even when we try to strive, like I think it was Curry who said that these protective factors, whether it be education, income, which are highly correlated with each other, and you do all the things that you're supposed to do. You have a father and mother in the house, you're in a middle class neighborhood or upper income neighborhood, they go to the right schools. Black boys still don't have protective factors in those environments, and their education and income do not protect them. So what you see here is white boys who are raised in wealthy families will stay rich or upper middle class as adults, but black boys raised in similarly rich households won't. That's systemic. That's not about their ability, their capability. Something else is at play, and we won't ask those deeper level questions to find out. We really know, we just don't want to admit it. What's going on in these schools, these neighborhoods, among these teachers and other key players that will help explain why black boys are not achieving at the levels that we expect them to achieve. So you see most of the black boys who have wealthy parents won't stay wealthy as adults. Next slide. When we compare this against other groups, for instance, this is what we just looked at. Next slide. What about the chances for poor white and black boys? Can they improve their chances to become wealthy? We see that's almost a statistical impossibility for black boys. Next slide. How about black girls and black boys? We see that, again, more black boys will grow up to be poor adults or in lower middle class adult categories than to become wealthy. Next slide. Same thing true for rich black girls and black boys. Black boys, unless you're an NBA or NFL player, will wind up being poor. Next slide. this is just when we look at persistent and aggressive interactions with the police. We all have been there. My first semester at the University of Utah, I'm driving, actually, I had encounters with the police 2 times in the first semester. One, I'm just about to make a turn and they just bothered me. They wouldn't let me make a turn. Second one, it was a colleague of mine who was meeting with me to talk about my transition to Salt Lake City. And we were having lunch. And she happened to go to the same graduate program that I went to. So I was giving her a ride home after lunch. And I normally don't really like white women in my car. Things just seem like they happen. I'm sorry for those, that's just my experience. And I'm already nervous, but it was a friend, so I wanted to give her a ride home. And she, if you don't know, Salt Lake City is mountainous, and she lived up the mountain. So she's on one side of me, I'm driving, and she's talking. And just like a normal black person, I'm looking through the rearview mirror, I see the police tailing us. So I'm driving, and she's talking. I'm driving, and she's talking. I pull over to the curb, to her house. As I pull over, the police pull over, and they get out the car. It's 2. The one on her side had his hand on the gun. The one on my side had his gun unholstered. And I say, Audrey, the police have been following us, and they got their guns sprung. She jumps out the car like Wonder Woman. So my hands are on the steering wheel, and I'm thinking I'm gonna take a bullet to the head. And she says, officer, what's the problem? And they said, ma'am, are you all right? Officer, what's the problem? Ma'am, are you all right? 4 times. And she says, I'm Dr. Blow and Blow, and he's Dr. Smith. He's just dropping me off at my house. And they looked down and said, well, we noticed he parked a little far from the curb. And I'm like 10 inches from the curb, right? Now, this is her first time being in a situation of driving while black. Cold driving, or cold sitting, or cold something, right? She goes in her house and tells her husband a story. He says, are you crazy jumping out the car like that? He could have got shot. He knew the dynamics. Now, she's from Illinois, so she should have known the dynamics. But now the police followed me all the way for about another mile before they did a U-turn. Then they go on about their business. That's the moment, those are the moments that we don't think about what is happening in our body. What's going on biologically that is putting stress and strain that causes us to have a shorter lifespan. When we look at all these metrics about what happens to black boys, or black men, and specifically for this example, why are they dying earlier than any other group? Particularly those with higher education and higher income. It's not a protective factor, particularly when you're in white communities. We do much better. I could do much better on the south or west side of Chicago as a black professor than I can in Salt Lake City, Utah. Just that stress and the strain. I've told you 2 examples already. First year with my daughter, and that same year with a colleague. So this study here basically says that black men reporting a higher number of lifetime police stops have 3 times greater odds of current racial battle fatigue symptoms, and black women about 2 times greater odds. Next slide. Can you push that?
Hello? It took me a long time to make this call. I can't get my...
Tonight was supposed to be about Aurora choosing a permanent police chief and committing to a new direction.
Well, at least that's one way to look at it. Another is that Aurora committed to a new direction months ago. We're still talking about the same old things.
Over the weekend, police pulled over and handcuffed a family they believed was driving a stolen car.
But as Denver 7's Jessica Porter reports, that car wasn't stolen. In fact, Aurora should not have even been looking for a car at all.
Terrified children scream for their mother, surrounded by police and detained over suspicion they were driving a stolen vehicle.
Why are you now placing these children on the ground, face into the concrete, it's hot, in front of all of us, and screaming at them, and they're telling you they're hurt?
Jenny Wirtz was in the parking lot of this shopping center on Buckley and Iliff in Aurora. She says a police car slowly pulled behind the family, and the officer drew their weapon on not just the driver, but the children.
The first officer stayed in her car and had the gun pointed and ordered the driver out.
Several of the children were handcuffed. Wirtz says officers tried to bully her into not recording them.
That makes me very mad because I am not anti-police. I am anti what happened yesterday, and that was ridiculous.
But the car the family was driving was in fact not stolen. And the vehicle Aurora police should have been looking for is a motorcycle that happens to have the same plate number in a different state. Video shows over a dozen officers responded and continued to arrive even after police realized no crime was committed.
I do not think a stolen vehicle is worth traumatizing the lives of children, not to mention the fact that I was 20 feet away with a drawn gun. They didn't even tell me to move.
Aurora police say officers drew their weapons because it's part of their unwritten policy for a high-risk stop. The chief blamed the incident on a license plate reader, even though the vehicle wasn't a motorcycle.
I totally understand that family's anger, so I don't want to diminish that anger. But I will say that it wasn't a profiling incident. It was a hit that came through the system, and they have a picture of their actual vehicle that the officers saw.
Wirtz has filed a complaint with Internal Affairs.
At the very least, not only do you owe this family a much more genuine apology than the one I saw, but you owe it to them to never let that happen again.
Jessica Porter, Denver 7.
Now, despite the horrible makeup, one of the things that she said is that this family was traumatized. And think about how often we go through something like that. If you haven't personally been through it, you know somebody who has. What kind of traumatic experience is that among the black community? Hashim told me I have to start wrapping up, and I don't know how many more slides I got, but I mean, this just puts it in a quantifiable context where you can see that black men are disproportionately facing this type of experience. So if you were to ask a white woman who has no affiliation with the understanding of black men, so let's say she's a therapist, right? She might be saying that he's exaggerating this experience, right? So if you just compare the black male experience to any other group, now obviously, despite the lower numbers of black women, they tend to be our mothers, our sisters, our wives, our cousins, so they know something, they feel it, they hear it, they see it. Next slide. We're gonna speed through this. Just keep clicking. Well, you see this is in New York at the height of stop and frisk. Go next slide. Just want to point this out. So this is how it impacts at a community level when we talk about public health. High-profile killings of black people, there's a spillover effect. So if you were a black person who were killed by the police in the state, all right, he said wrap it up, in the state at which it occurred, you're likely to have up to 3 months of poor mental health days, all right? Let's speed through. Same thing for highly publicized events, but nationally black people are experiencing. Let's go. Being tall, I'm 6'3". I'm the top 3% of U.S. black men. Black men who are my height or taller have to get small, oftentimes when we interact. I can't go to school, I can't talk to the teachers about my kids when they were young because I'm a big threat. I have to send my wife in. What does that mean being black and trying to show your manhood, right? To protect your children. Next slide. We're gonna this is an important one. I wish I could show it, but it's, it happened to me when I was a doctoral student. But this was at Northwestern University, an engineering student who was, a white woman called and said she thought he had broken into a car. His brand new car, the police whooped him. I got it on video.
Hold here.
All right. I got my...
On the ground! On the ground! Get on the ground! Turn around! Turn around! Cooperate. Stop resisting. Stop resisting. Sir, you're on video. All right. As FYI. All right. Fine. You got a car. I got cuffs. Yes, this is my vehicle, sir. I was trying to fix something on the roof. Okay. I have evidence to that end.
Well, when we tell you to get down, you got to get down.
Yes,
man.
sir. I understand.
Okay.
Now, why am I being put in the handcuffs?
We got to verify the car is not stolen, man.
This is E14. I'm a PhD student at Northwestern University in the Department of Materials Science and Engineering. I purchased this vehicle January 23rd, 2015 from Libertyville Chevrolet. I have all the evidence.
Ask me who it registers to.
Myself.
It registers. 73.
370.
Can you tell us who the plate registers to?
I don't know why I'm being registered. I didn't gave you an order.
That was Zakiya and RJN 507 William Burger.
Yes, you did. No, I did not. There is something called the Fifth Amendment.
No. Okay. That doesn't apply.
Yes, it does. No, reasonable search and seizure. Why?
Hey, what's up?
Hi, I called.
506.
Okay.
It looked like he had a bar in his hand and was trying to jimmy it open.
Okay.
I feel really like I didn't mean to like racial profile, just like
Oh yeah, no,
like that, and,
All right.
and I don't want to like.
All right, man, just calm down.
I know.
Okay.
I just.
All right. He got a different issue going on right now. Let me see. Dan, want to get your information?
Yeah. No. Yeah. But
Okay.
I can give it to you.
Okay. Come this way.
I think it's fine.
Okay. I will have to get there.
Here, and he gets, let's go to the next slide. Next slide. Settlement for $1.25 million. Just keep going. Keep going. Now, I'm gonna skip some of this because we kind of talked about, but I just want to spend just a second here. Afropenia is something that I developed, and this is a biopsychosocial condition resulting from sustained exposure to anti-Black psychological, social, and cultural stresses. And this bleeds into things like what Akbar talked about with the anti-self disorders, alien self, self-destructive, organic, and also menticide. Next slide. That should be an A on that menticide. Keep going. Since Dr. August talked about some of these, keep going. We're going to get to the end. Stop right here real quick. This is the anti-self disorder that Naeem Akbar talks about, that all this goes into Afropenia and the racial battle fatigue. Think about almost every anti-self character that you know, from movies or rap or anything, it's always black men. Almost every movie that you could think of, Uncle Ruckus or Steven or Clayton Bigsby, it's only black men, because it's building that type of image, that anti-black misandry in your mind of disgust. Let's keep going real quick. Keep going. Keep going. Same thing with the movies, self-destructive behaviors. So they're orchestrating our tastes, our laughter, our comedy. Comedians are only given a sliver of humor to arrange to talk it. It's always sex and drugs and physical violence. It's not the breadth of comedy. And so, because I'm old, you know, I got some of these old school stuff. Keep going. Keep going. We're doing some good things at my hospital, our mental health clinic. And what we're doing is we're addressing head on what's going on with black boys, right, and black men. And we have this national campaign. You'll see billboards and everything around your neighborhood. You'll see PSA, Love Your Mind. And a lot of that is based on the work of black male studies and other scholars that can help us understand why do we feel this way? What's going on with racial battle fatigue in the lives of black boys and men? And we build upon that to talk about black women as well later. Keep going. This is a video. I won't do it because he's saying get out of here. Keep going.
I debate all day.
Let's go past that. So we're going to, this should be it, I think. Keep going. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. So we just got to resist, respond, recognize, and realize. Keep going, and that should be it. Keep going. Go all the way to the end. So I got a lot to say in such a little bit of time. You brought me all the way from Utah. You know, I see black people, I get excited. Keep going. All right, thank you.
Give it up for Dr. Smith, brothers, family, friends, loved ones. Give it up for Dr. Smith. Yeah, all the way from Utah.